The ulama of usul will not accept it. They want absolute qat'i sudur, they need proof. Otherwise, you can include tahrif in aqidah, because according to Ayatollah Hadi Ma'rifat, there are 200 mu'tabar, reliable narrations from reliable sources, including the classical ones, which prove tahrif has taken place. And yet all the maraja and mujtahideen reject them. So what does that tell you? That shows you that the maraja and mujtahideen are not low-level, street-level preachers in the business of fooling people. When it comes to beliefs like tahrif, they're not going to fool people and say, oh, we have 200 narrations, mashallah. Or as Muhaddith al-Nuri, the akhbaris, they were in the business of fooling people with these kinds of, in tahrif, they pulled wool on people's eyes. Al-Muhaddith al-Nuri, he wrote an entire book entitled Fasl al-Khitab fi tahrifi kitab, fi ithbati tahrifi kitab Rabbil Arbab, in which he brought over 1100 narrations. Yeah, 1100 narrations from the reliable classical sources, yes. So how did we get 1100 narrations in our sources proving tahrif? Many of them, at least 200 of them, with sahih chains. So this is the shocking fact that the scholars of Rijal have discovered, because of which speakers like this can never pull wool over their eyes. What have they discovered? They have discovered, Baba, the magnitude of fabrication in the Shia hadith corpus is such that you can find sahih chains, da'if chains, all kind of chains you can find for narrations which are promoting absolute khurafat, absolute lies and falsehood and nonsense like tahrif. You can get 200 narrations. So now if you're a street level speaker, you will take those, you'll say 200. This guy, he has barely 4 or 5 narrations. He wants to insert Imaamah into the central aqaid of Islam on the basis of these few narrations. The Maraji and Mujtahideen, their method is so foolproof that even 200 narrations about tahrif cannot fool them. So that's the difference between the highest levels of scholarship and the lowest levels of scholarship, is that these people can get easily fooled. And even unfortunately our lay people. Although I'm hoping, after sharing, the aim of sharing all these researches about the magnitude of fabrication in our sources, is that inshallah we are hoping, our brothers and sisters, you will become critical thinkers, you'll become enlightened by this research, and then you will not be, when a mimbar or a speaker, zakir, sits on the mimbar and tells you, oh, this is in Al-Kafi and this is Bihar, and they try to pull wool over your eyes and take you for a long taxi ride on a taxi with unregistered license plate. You don't get taken for a ride. You come out of the taxi and say, please don't fool me. I know all about the hadith. I don't have to be an expert to know that if our hadith have more than 1100 narrations just in support of tahrif, out of which 200 are even being authenticated by Ayatollah Hadi Ma'rifat, but then he's rejecting their content, because he's saying, and this is what the scholars of Rijal have discovered, is that the smart fabricators of hadith, they actually used to invent sahih chains for their false claims. So the one who can invent the text of a narration, fabricates a text of a narration, he is also capable of fabricating a chain. And that's why the smart ghulat and the mufawwida and the smart fabricators of hadith, this is what they used to do. They knew they could not fool people through any other method. If they attribute falsehoods to themselves, they're already exposed. If they attribute them to the discredited ones, the narration will still collapse and fall on its face. So what do? They isolate the companions of the Imams and the different tabaqat of narrators who have been classified as being absolutely reliable and authentic. And then they take those chains and they append those chains to their fabricated narrations, and then they circulate them among the Shia. So this is how even sometimes Shaykh al-Kulaini and the Saduq and all these people, even though they had insight into the chains, that is how sometimes they ended up getting fooled. It's because they did not they were not very particular about scrutinizing content. They used to look more at the chain. If the chain is authentic, they accept the narration, even if it is claiming crazy and silly stuff like Imam al-Hasan being mitlaq, or they used to say, no, if everyone here is authentic, then we have to take it. How can we reject the narration of the thiqat? And this is why the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, once Yunus ibn Abdul Rahman presented those narrations, I presented you that narration before. He presented them before Imam Rida alayhi salam, and Imam Rida alayhi salam dismissed them. So Yunus was surprised. He said, these are the books of the noteworthy and trustworthy companions of your grandfather, Al-Baqir and Al-Sadiq alayhi salam. So you mean to tell me that they are fabricating narrations against Imam Al-Sadiq? Imam Rida said, no, إِنَّ الْمُغِيرَةَ بْنَ سَعِيدٍ دَسَّ فِي كُتُبِ أَصْحَابِ أَبِي عَبْدِ اللَّهِ or في إن أبا الخطاب, in the case of the books of Abu Abdullah's companions, Abu al-Khattab Muhammad ibn Abi Zaynab, was the one who inserted narrations into them. And in the case of the books of the companions of Al-Baqir alayhi salam, it was Al-Mughira ibn Sa'id. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says, إن المغيرة بن سعيد دس في أحاديث في كتب أصحاب أبي أحاديث لم يحدث بها أبي. He says this Mughira ibn Sa'id, may Allah curse him. The Imam explicitly curses him. He says, he has inserted ahadith in the books of the companions of my father, which my father never narrated. But the hadith are found where? In the books of the reliable companions. So that is why once the Imams discovered this dirty trick of the ghulat, that is when they issued the orders. They said, Baba, now don't look at who is narrating. Any narration they bring you, take it to the Qur'an first. If the Qur'an verifies it, if the Qur'an confirms it, you accept it. If it rejects it, or if it contradicts the Qur'an, or even if مَا لَمْ تَجِدُوا لَهُ شَاهِدًا أَوْ شَاهِدَيْنِ مِنْ كِتَابِ اللَّهِ. If you are unable to find a supporting verse, a confirming verse for the narration in the Qur'an, throw it, dismiss it. Don't accept anything now except what Allah has confirmed in the Qur'an. The rest, reject it without guilt. So this was the approach and methodology that the Imams advocated after they discovered that the hadith sources have been compromised, they've been infiltrated, the ghulat have inserted all kinds of khurafat, and the Imam, the terms he uses to refer to the content that the ghulat have inserted is كُلُّ مَا كَانَ فِيهِ مِنَ الْكُفْرِ وَالْغُلُو. They have inserted kufr and ghulu in these books. So that is why they warned us not to trust. And that's why Yunus ibn Abdul Rahman in Rijal al-Kashi, that is what is mentioned. The people, they came to him complaining and saying what? They said, مَا أشدك في الحديث يا أبا محمد وأكثر إنكارك لما يرويه أصحابنا. So Yunus ibn Abdul Rahman, after he was trained by Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, when he came out and he was with the people and he started applying the methodology that Imam al-Rida alayhi salam taught him, people started having problems with him. They said, what is the matter with you? We present to you narrations of some of the most trustworthy companions. All the chain is all siqat, trustworthy people. Known companions of Imam al-Baqir al-Sadiq, we are presenting you their narrations and you're rejecting them. You're saying, no, this is ghalat, this is batil, this is falsehood, this is fabrication. What's wrong with you? So many narrations you are rejecting. He said, yes, because I've been trained by the master. Abu al-Hasan al-Rida alayhi salam has taught me the message, the methodology now. The methodology is not even to look, it doesn't matter who is narrating. If the hadith doesn't have support in the Quran, throw it. So that is the manhaj of Yunus ibn Abdul Rahman, and that is our manhaj as well. Any narration, we don't care how it has been transmitted, who the transmitter is, authentic, not authentic. If it is not verified by the Quran, as Imam Rida alayhi salam says, then he says, لا تقبلوا علينا. He appeals to us, do not accept anything in our name except that which has been verified by the Quran. And especially those narrations and ahadith which contradict the claims of the Quran. He says, fear Allah and never accept those narrations. So for example, this first narration that he presents from Kamaluddin, not only is the sanad weak and da'if because of the jahala of the primary narrator, but even the content is clearly and manifestly contradicting the Quran. How? Because if you see the hadith that's presented to Imam al-Askari, the hadith, one part of it is أن الأرض لا تخلو من حجة لله على خلقه إلى يوم القيامة. That the earth will not be devoid of a hujjah, a proof or representative of God upon his creations until the day of judgment. So this idea has appeared in other ahadith as well, that the earth can never be free of the hujjah of Allah. At every given moment, every second, there must be a divinely appointed warner or guide or messenger present. In other narrations, it's mentioned that if the hujjah was lifted from the earth would collapse, it would be destroyed, it would implode. But the problem is the people who fabricated this narration did not realize that the Quran completely destroys and demolishes this claim. The claim that the earth cannot survive without the existence of a hujjah of Allah at every time. Every time there must be some hujjah from Allah. There must be some messenger or guide or warner or some personality who is serving as a representative of God on the earth. The earth cannot be free of this. This is contradicted by the Quran itself, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Ma'idah, chapter number 5, verse number 19, He says, يا أهل الكتاب قد جاءكم رسولنا يبين لكم على فترة من الرسل أن تقولوا ما جاءنا من بشير ولا نذير فقد جاءكم بشير ونذير والله على كل شيء قدير. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addressing the people of the book, He says, O people of the book, there has indeed come to you our messenger, making things clear to you. After a fatra, ala fatratin min ar-rusuli. After a fatra means a break, a gap in the series of messengers. So sometimes the messengers would come in quick succession. So you have Ibrahim alayhi salam, and then you have Ismail and Ishaq, and then you have Yaqub and Yusuf. So it's a continuous succession. But in the case of the Christians and the Jews, after Isa alayhi salam was elevated by Allah, Allah took him, He elevated him and raised him up to him. Between that time and that moment and the arrival of the Holy Prophet, there is a gap. Allah is testifying there is a gap, during which there was no one to warn from Allah, and there was no divinely appointed guide or messenger or any kind of Hujjah on the earth at this time. And yet the earth managed to survive pretty well. It did not collapse, it did not implode, it did not self-destruct, as the riwayat claim. So you have a period of at least 5 to 6 centuries for which the earth is without any warner. And that's why Allah says, He says, if I had not sent the Holy Prophet, this is what you would say, أَن تَقُولُوا مَا جَاءَنَا مِن بَشِيرٍ وَلَا نَذِيرٍ. No bringer of glad tidings or no warner came to us. So if there was a divine Hujjah on the earth, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not need to send the Prophet. Allah is saying the whole reason why we have sent you a Prophet, clarifying to you all these things, is because there was a gap in which you did not have anyone to warn you and to show you what deviations have come inside your religion. So then Allah says, فَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ بَشِيرٌ وَنَذِيرٌ. Okay, so now the Bashir and Nadhir has come, the bringer of glad tidings and the warner who is going to warn you about all the fabrications and deviations and distortions that have taken place inside your religion. He's coming and telling you. So now you have no Hujjah against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the important thing is, this narration, this verse of the Qur'an clearly proves that there was a break and a gap in succession of divine warners in the 5 to 6 centuries or so between the departure of Prophet Isa alayhi salam and the arrival of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And the Qur'an is also clear. It's not just the Ahlul Kitab, the Kuffar and Mushrikeen of the Arabs. They also لِتُنذِرَ قَوْمًا مَا أَتَاهُم مِّن نَذِيرٍ مِّن قَبْلِكَ. We have sent you to warn a people whose forefathers who never received a warner before you. In Surah Yasin, لِتُنذِرَ قَوْمًا مَا أُنذِرَ آبَاؤُهُمْ فَهُمْ غَافِلُونَ. Their forefathers did not receive any warning. They were not warned. So they are in ghafla, they are in a state of unawareness. So the Qur'an is clear that there was no Hujjah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the people in this intervening period. So you can see how this one verse demolishes all of these. These narrations are actually invented by the ghulat at a later stage. In the Quran, Allah is showing you that the earth can easily survive. The earth doesn't always have to have a divinely appointed guide or messenger or warner. Rather, Allah can send a prophet like Isa alayhi salam after 5 centuries, in the 5 centuries after him. Why was no additional prophet sent? Because after Isa alayhi salam came, he's left behind very clear teachings. And so, from the point of view of Allah, after a prophet has come, he has delivered the message, the Hujjah is complete now. Now, if you change and distort the message, no, that is your problem. And so, even after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then he sends 6 centuries later, he sends another prophet who comes and clarifies everything. So that way Allah's Hujjah is completely fulfilled on these people. So this is why, my dear brothers and sisters, this narration, the first narration that he presented from Kamaluddin wa Tamam al-Ni'mah by Shaykh al-Saduq is actually completely unreliable, and its text contradicts the Quran. Therefore we throw it out and we dismiss it, we discard it as per the instructions of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam themselves. The second narration now we come, which he presented. This one is actually really, this narration is an insult to the intelligences of the audience and also us, I feel, because this narration is narrating from Al-Thaqib fil Manaqib by Ibn Hamza al-Tusi. Just look at the chain of this narration. Well, actually, it doesn't have a chain. It's a mursal narration, which the ulama and fuqaha would not accept in fiqh, in the minor bab of fiqh, they would not accept. Let alone aqidah, salvation of the whole ummah, you're going to base on the back of such a weak and chainless narration. And a fabrication. We know this is a fabrication because when a narration, for the first time it surfaces, from the time of the Imams, all the classical scholars, Kulaini and Saduq and all, they apparently do not know about this. The first time it surfaces is in the Kitab Al-Thaqib fil Manaqib by Ibn Hamza Tusi, who is a hadith narrator and compiler who lives in the second half of the 6th century. He's min A'lam al-Qarn al-Sadis al-Hijri. So he's living in the second half of the 6th century. Okay. And he is narrating this narration from whom? An Muhammad ibn al-Ala al-Jurjani, who says, Hajjajtu fara'aytu Ali ibn Musa Rida. I performed Hajj and I saw Imam Ali ibn Musa Rida alayhi salam. So that's why I said this narration is really an insult to the intelligence of any Usuli scholar or Rijalist. Because the primary narrator, first of all, this Muhammad ibn al-Ala al-Jurjani is majhulun. He has not been authenticated by any scholar of Rijal, classical or present. That's number one. And number two, the author has not mentioned any link, any chain linking him to the primary narrator. If the primary narrator, Muhammad ibn al-Ala al-Jurjani, was a contemporary of the 8th Imam, Ali ibn Musa Rida alayhi salam, who lived in the second half of the 2nd century and the first few years of the 3rd century, of the first half of the 3rd century, whereas the author of this book is believed to have lived in the second half of the 6th century, as I told you. It's mentioned in the very introduction of the tahqiq of this book, that he lived in the second half of the 6th century. So that means Ibn Hamza al-Tusi, the author of this book, must have had to invent one heck of a time machine with which to time travel back all these centuries from the mid 6th century all the way back to the 2nd century to meet this narrator, Muhammad ibn al-Ala al-Jurjani, and then narrate from him. So obviously he does not have any chain, and he has taken this narration from books that were found here and there. He does not give his source, he does not give the chain, the link, and any narration which does not have a valid chain connecting it to the Imam, you cannot attribute it to the Imam. You cannot prove it to be from the Imam. And this is the first sign of a fabrication, that a hadith which is surfacing 600 years after the fact, and the people before, they are completely in the dark. This is the first symptom of a fabricated hadith. So we have this phenomenon in Ilm al-Hadith, Ilm al-Rijal. This is one of the first things that the scholars of Rijal search for when they're studying fabrications. The first sign that alerts them to the fact that they're dealing with a fabrication is a hadith from Rasulullah or an Imam who lived in the 1st century, 2nd century. The narrator who is claiming to attribute it to them himself is living in the 6th century, 5th century, 8th century sometimes even. And he's saying that Rasulullah said this. Yeah, so show us the time machine that you used to travel back to the time of Rasulullah, then maybe we can accept. Otherwise, this is a completely unfounded narration that no self-respecting scholar of Rijal worth his salt would be willing to accept. Now we come to the next narration that he presented from Al-Kafi, from the Bab of Da'a'im al-Islam. This one he was really excited about. And interestingly, and this is what tells us that he's actually deliberately duplicitous, is that this is an indication of that in the case of this narration, he does not follow his favorite methodology with which he authenticates Du'a al-Iftitah and the first narration of actually doing that pole jump, that Olympic level pole jump of jumping straight to the topmost narrator. Here in this narration, he doesn't jump to the topmost narrator. Rather, he follows the ladder approach. So all of a sudden, he's a ladderist now. Before, he was an Olympic gymnast. Now he is a ladderist. He's climbing the ladder now. Because if you noticed in the clip, he says, no, look at the chain. Muhammad ibn Yahya narrating from Ahmad ibn Muhammad, from Safwan ibn Yahya. He goes all the way up. So that means he is familiar with the ladder approach. Alhamdulillah, we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he's familiar with the ladder approach. The only problem is he doesn't have enough insight into how to assess the rungs of the ladder. And also, he does not understand that you don't only look at the ladder, but after you climb the ladder and you verify each link, you then look at the content to which this ladder is. The ladder is culminating in what content? Yani, what is the claim of the narration? So that's why the scholars of Rijal, those who are thorough and robust, and especially the scholars of Usul, they don't only consider the chain, they also look at the content. If the content is problematic, they will throw out the narration even if the chain has all the thiqat in it. They don't care. And that is why he was claiming that you cannot show me any scholar of Rijal who can destroy this chain or who can discredit this narration. This is proof that of how poorly informed he is and how poorly researched his presentation was. Al-Allama Muhammad Baqir al-Bahbudi is one of the most famous scholars of Rijal who has done a comprehensive study of the entire Al-Kafi. In his Sahih collection of narrations from Al-Kafi, which is entitled As-Sahih min Al-Kafi, in volume 1 of this book, you look at pages 67 and 68 where he presents the narrations from Da'im al-Islam, he throws out this narration that he's presenting. So this narration, which he was under the impression is super authentic and sahih, and he mentioned the chain and all, Al-Allama Muhammad Baqir al-Bahbudi has thrown out this narration from Al-Kafi. So Hassan, now you go and argue with him. Why did you remove this? I feel that everyone in the chain is completely authentic and reliable and this, and the classical scholars have praised them and all. Say, Baba, what the scholars of Rijal will tell you is that if you are going to approach with this mentality, that means you've been living in a cave. You're completely shut out from the best cutting edge researches that are coming out in the field of Rijal and Hadith. The scholars of Usul and Rijal, they don't claim that if a narration has narrators which have been authenticated by the classical scholars of Rijal, bas, we close our eyes and we accept it. If we close our eyes and we accept it, then we will also have to accept the narration that Imam al-Hasan na'udhu billah was mutlaq. Because that chain, even Ayatollah Sistani's team, they are admitting. So they don't throw out the chain. They say the chain is sahih. And I can read out to you. I can actually read out to you the comment of the team of Rijalists who are working under Ayatollah Syed Ali Sistani, when they look at this narration about Imam al-Hasan being mitlaq, being a serial divorcer. Look at their response. They say, لَعَلَّ هَذِي. So the narration in Al-Kafi actually has a weak chain. But in Kitab al-Mahasin, this narration has another version of this narration of Imam al-Hasan being mitlaq, has a separate chain for it, which is given in Kitab al-Mahasin. This chain is from Ahmad ibn Abdullah al-Barqi, an ibn Mahbub, an Abdullah ibn Sinan, an Abi Abdullah. So even Ayatollah Sistani's team, they are not able to destroy this chain, or they're not able to raise any question about this chain. Although, personally speaking, as per our research, there is still a weak point in this chain. But in any case, if people are interested, we can share. But for now, let us share the opinion of Sayyid Sistani. He does not accept this narration, but his team, they say that the chain is sahih. And that's why I look at their response. They say, لَعَلَّ هَذِهِ الرِّوَايَةِ هي أصعب الروايات حول الشبهة لصحة سندها ومع هذا لا يمكن الأخذ بمتنها ومضمونها. They say this riwayah, because there are a number of narrations claiming that Imam al-Hasan is mitlaq and that Imam Ali alayhi salam said he is mitlaq. So because there are a number of narrations, they deal with all of those and they dismiss them on sanad grounds. But this last narration, they are unable to dismiss on sanad grounds. They say the sanad is impeccable. It is sahih. So they say لعل هذه الرواية هي أصعب الروايات حول الشبهة لصحة سندها. This is one of the most difficult riwayats. The riwayah of al-Barqi in al-Mahasin, claiming Imam al-Hasan is mitlaq, they say this is the most difficult riwayah to demolish. You know why? Because لصحة سندها, because its sanad is really clean. It is really authentic. So then, because the sanad is authentic, we accept it. So this is what the speaker would like to say. He says, oh, the sanad of this narration in Al-Kafi is absolutely authentic. So on this basis, we can include Imaamah among the daruriyat of deen and argue that anyone who dies without recognizing the Imam of his time, he dies a death of Jahiliyyah. But Baba, if we follow your approach, then we can also authenticate this narration, because Sayyid Sistani's team is testifying that yes, even as per the manhaj of our teacher, Sayyid Sistani, this narration cannot be assaulted at the level of its sanad. The sanad, obviously, the fabricators inventing this are smart. So they take the best of the chains. So what do they say then? They say, وَمَعَ هَذَا لَا يُمْكِنُ الْأَخْذُ بِمَتْنِهَا وَمَضْمُونِهَا. Despite the fact that its sanad is sahih, we cannot accept the madmoon, the content and the claim of this narration. So what do you learn from this, brothers and sisters? That maybe at the street level, if you are arguing with street level people, maybe you can convince them by bringing out a narration from Al-Kafi and then arguing that it is sahih, even though we have shown you that not all the ulama accept it as sahih. There are people who have thrown it out, and not people actually, but specialists and experts in ilm al-rijal who have thrown out this narration completely. But even if you dismiss their research and ignore it, and you say, no, we insist on accepting that sahih, fine. One sahih narration or two sahih narrations, or even if you can bring 200 sahih narrations, like the ones we have for Tahrif al-Qur'an according to Ayatollah Hadi Ma'rifat, it's not sahih but mu'tabar, reliable. And then if you follow the Jam' al-Qara'in approach, if a person wants to build itminan, can easily, Allama Majlisi built itminan on that basis. So that's why even this itminani methodology, we don't agree with it. We follow the policy of the Imams. Imam said, itminan, no, go to the Qur'an. What the bayinat and muhkamat of the Qur'an defend and support and confirm, accept that. What they don't, throw it. It's not deen, it says. So in any case, Ayatollah Sistani's team, when they reject this narration, they reject it. Number one, they say, okay, the sanad is sahih, but we still reject it. So that shows you that if a narration, the content is problematic, even if the sanad is sahih, does not help rescue it. So how is it problematic? You then have to show and prove. So they say, number one, للحط من كرامة الإمام الحسن عليه السلام والذي قد ثبتت عصمته بطريق قطعي. They say because this narration infringes upon the dignity of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, even though his infallibility has been established through a qat'i means. Therefore, anything that goes against that, we just throw it out. Number two, مناقضتها ومنافاتها للآيات والروايات التي دلت على فضله وعظمته فلا بد من طرح هذه الرواية. They say the second thing is that this riwayah is contradicting and negating the ayat and riwayat which indicate his excellence and his greatness. So because this narration is contradicting the Qur'an and the narrations, we throw it out, the Sahih narrations. And then point number three, they point to the opinion of Sahib al-Hada'iq. Sahib al-Hada'iq, in al-Hada'iq al-Nadira, the author of al-Hada'iq, he says, وَرُبَّمَا حَمَلَ بَعْضُهُمْ هَذِهِ الْأَخْبَارِ عَلَى مَا تَقَدَّمَ فِي سَابِقِهَا مِنْ سُوءِ خُلْقٍ فِي أُولَٰئِكَ النِّسَاءِ وَنَحْوِهِ مِمَّا يُوجِبُ أَوْلَوِيَّةَ الطَّلَاقِ وَلَا يَخْفَى بُعْدُهُ. So now Sahib al-Hada'iq, he actually refers to what we would refer to as intellectual gymnastics that some scholars have tried to, scholars who do not reject this narration. And they say that no, this narration is correct, but Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, they try to justify his being a mutlaq. So they say it is possible that, maybe Imam al-Hasan divorced those women because of certain defects in their character. So the Sahib al-Hada'iq says, obviously he doesn't use the term intellectual gymnastics, but this is pure gymnastics. If Imam al-Hasan, if this was really the case, that Imam al-Hasan divorced so many women because of defects in those women, first of all, you have to be a really hopeless person, really running on really bad luck for you to keep on constantly marrying women who turn out to be of a flawed character. Yani on the one hand, they're claiming the Imams have ilm al-ghayb. On the other hand, they can't even find a suitable wife with which they can continue the marriage. They have to constantly divorce and then marry a new person. So obviously this is a bogus, nonsensical claim. And even Sahib al-Hada'iq, he rejects it, and look at what he says. He says, لأنه لو كان كذلك لكان عذرا شرعيا فكيف ينهى أمير المؤمنين عليه السلام عن تزويجه والحال كذلك. If Imam al-Hasan was a mutlaq who became a mutlaq because of a genuine reason, yani the women he married had defects in them, and that's why he ended up having to divorce so many women because every single woman had a defect. He said, if that was the case, then why is Amir al-Mu'mineen turning people away from his son? Because the narration says he's saying, don't marry al-Hasan, la tuzawwij al-Hasan. In other versions of the narration, he actually gets up on the mimbar of Kufa and he tells the people, don't give your daughters to al-Hasan because he's mutlaq. So if the fault is with the women, why is Imam discouraging people from marrying the son? He should have been defending the son and saying that no, it's not his problem. It's just bad luck. The women he has married, the defect was in them. But no, he puts the finger of blame on Imam al-Hasan. He says, don't marry him because he is the... So that's why even Sahib al-Hada'iq, he is not able to come out of this ishkal, and he says, وَبِالْجُمْلَةِ فَالْمَقَامْ مَحَلُّ إِشْكَالِ. He says, this maqam is mahallu ishkal. This is a complicated problem now. وَالْحَالِ وَلَا يَحْضُرُنِي الْآنِ الْجَوَابَ عَنْهُ. So he raises his hands and he says, I don't have an answer to this right now. وَحَبْسُ الْقَلَمِ عَنْ ذَلِكَ أَوْلَى بِالْأَدَبِ. And to stop my pen and not write anything about this is better. It's more in requirements, with the requirements of etiquette, for me to just not say anything about this, because he is himself confused. What do we do with this narration? Now, he's an akhbari, of course, following the akhbari methodology. In the usuli methodology, it's much easier. The narration is completely, it is going against the established history and established facts that we know about Imam al-Hasan al-Islam. They say it is going against the ayat and riwayat, which make his fadl and his excellence clear. So therefore, they reject it. And in the same way, my dear brothers and sisters, any narration, the Imams of Ahlul Bayt did not even put qaid. They said any, and Ayatollah Sheikh Muhammad Rida Muzaffar, if we have the time, I'll bring you his statement. He says, not only is the narration supposed to not contradict the Qur'an, no, it is supposed to have, you have to ard jami' al-akhbar, all narrations, you have to bring them to the court of the Qur'an. And once you bring them to the court of the Qur'an, as we will do in a moment, then you can, if the Qur'an confirms the narration, you accept it. If the Qur'an denies it or contradicts it, you reject it. Before I come to the Qur'an, I also want to debunk and respond to another duplicitous deception that was perpetrated in that video, which is, at the beginning, he tries to argue that the hadith is accepted by both Shia and Sunni scholars. So he says it is important to note, because not many ahadith tick the box of being unanimously accepted by both Shia and Sunni. So you can see the deception and taking the poor, unsuspecting public for a ride right from this point. It begins right from the beginning. The fact that there are plenty of ahadith which have appeared in both Shia and Sunni books, and yet they have the dubious distinction of being outright manifest anti-Quranic and nonsensical fabrications, that has not dawned upon this speaker apparently. Just because a narration has been mentioned in both the Shia as well as the Sunni books, this is not something that you then use to say that, oh, this is accepted by all Muslims. First of all, at the first level. Why? Because we have narrations in both Shia and Sunni books which claim absolute khurafat, which are absolute falsehoods. Like the hadith of God's descent, na'udhu billah, from the sky on the back of a camel on the day of Arafah to this earth. This is mentioned in both Shia and Sunni sources. So if we follow his methodology, then what? We should say to the people that, oh, this narration cannot be wrong because all the Muslims accept it. So this is the first lie. All the Muslims, whether they are Shia or Sunni, no Muslim, no Shia, no Sunni says that we accept each and every single narration in each and every single of our books. No, they don't say that. Rather, if you go to the scholars on both sides scholars will tell you that no, we have ilm al-rijal, we have dirayatul hadith, we have so many checkpoints that we scrutinize these ahadith against, and then we authenticate. So yes, the riwayah of Allah, na'udhu billah, descending on the back of a camel and then going to Arafah, it's been mentioned by Allama al-Majlisi in Bihar al-Anwar. He's mentioned it in volume 96, page 262. And he quotes it from the asl of Zayd al-Narsi. And in Sunni sources, it has been mentioned by Al-Hafiz ibn Asakir, one of the giants of their hadith, in his Tariq Dimashq, volume 45, pages 7 to 8. It's hadith number 5209. So to be fair to both sides, the narration exists in both Shia and Sunni books. But Baba, look at what the scholars. So if you're just going to look at what's mentioned in the books, there are narrations in Shia books of hadith, even the classical ones, which say that which indicate there are 13 Imams. So they show the Prophet telling Fatima that there will be 12 Imams from your progeny. 12 Imams from the progeny of Fatima. And how many Imams do we have from the progeny of Fatima? Because Imam Ali alayhi salam, the first Imam, is not from the progeny of Fatima. So you have to minus him. After you minus Imam Ali alayhi salam, the progeny of Fatima begins from Al-Hasan and Hussein. And then it goes all the way up to the 12th Imam. So how many Imams do you have if you remove Imam Ali alayhi salam? 11. And in the hadith, the Prophet is telling Bibi Fatima that 12 Imams from your progeny. So okay, go ahead following this. And yeah, if you follow the Olympic pole jumping methodology, even the primary narrator is thiqa. So then, what do you do? Would you appreciate it if some Sunni came and said that all of you Isna Asharis, you are deviants, you will die a death of Jahiliyyah because the Prophet mentioned 13 Imams. You have only 12. Where is your 13th? You don't have ma'rifah of the 13th. So you will die lam ya'rif imam zamani. You will die in a state whereby you have not recognized one of the imams. So therefore, mata mitatan jahiliya, mashallah, all Shia will die death of jahiliya. So how will you respond to this? You respond to this by saying, yes, the hadith is there. We don't deny it's in our sources, but then you have to see. You can't just cherry pick, randomly take narrations from here and there. We have all kinds, as I've been constantly telling you, Baba, we have all kinds of khurafat. We have distorted narrations. We have fabricated narrations. We have all kinds of lies and falsehood exist in the hadith corpus. It is not sufficient. This methodology might work on the street, that you take your phone and you start do a simple Google search and you start quoting man mata, and alhamdulillah, we've proved aqidah. We have proved beyond all reasonable doubt that this is a core requirement for salvation, and that anyone who does not have it will die a death of jahiliyyah. No, my dear, it doesn't work this way. Otherwise, you can prove anthropomorphism. So yeah, Majlisi has mentioned it on the Shia side, Hafiz ibn Asakir Sunni side, mashallah. So now I can fool the public and say that, oh, this is Sunni and Shia both have mentioned it, mashallah. No, my dear, this is not the way to go. On both sides, before you quote the narration, you have to see what the scholars have said. On both sides, the hadith of Allah, na'udhu billah, descending on a camel, the Sunni ulama have also rejected it, and the Shia ulama have also rejected it. So don't fool the public and say, oh, no, it has appeared in both books. Same thing what he does is that when he claims that the Sunni scholars regard the claim that the hadith which says man mata wa lam ya'rif imam zamanihi mata mitatan jahiliya, when he says that this hadith is accepted by the Sunnis, this is manifest deception. He's lying against the Sunnis and misrepresenting their hadith literature, because the top Sunni scholars of hadith have never accepted the hadith as it has been phrased in the Shia sources. So this is the duplicity, the deception. He's taking the Shia version of the hadith and he is assuming that the same alfaz, the same words have appeared in the Sunni sources, whereas the reality is that the Sunnis have a hadith of their own, which resembles, the last part of the hadith resembles the last part of the Shia version. But the beginning part is completely different. So you're comparing apples and oranges. Only the last part is the same. But the beginning part, so I can actually mention to you the Sunni narration from Sahih Muslim, for example. He actually even gave them the reference of Sahih Muslim. So what does it say in Sahih Muslim? In this narration, and this narration Sunnis authenticate. But look at the wording. It's not the same narration that he is trying to promote. He accuses them of misrepresenting and connecting it to the khulafa and this. No, actually here, to be honest, the Sunnis are not misrepresenting. It's the hadith has appeared. The one who fabricated this hadith on their side, he was not interested in promoting Shiaism. So obviously he has not invented the hadith man mata lam ya'rif imam zamanihi. There is no mention of imam zamanihi in the hadith of Sahih Muslim. Rather, what is mentioned in the hadith of Sahih Muslim is that Abdullah bin Umar is narrating a hadith. He's saying, سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول من خلع يدا من طاعة لقي الله يوم القيامة ولا حجة له. Whoever removes his hand from obedience to the caliph of the time, he will meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment in a state where he has no hujjah, no proof to support him. So you can see this is an Umayyad invention. The Banu Umayyah, they got their narrators to invent this narration because many people, many Muslims were not in the mood to give bay'ah to these corrupt and decadent khulafa of Banu Umayyah. So now Banu Umayyah have a predicament, they have a problem. We want the bay'ah of the public. The public they hate us, especially because of our long rap sheet of crimes against Ahlul Bayt and even Muslims. So what do? Invent narrations then and attribute them to the Prophet, use scare tactics to bully the people into giving you bay'ah. So that's how this narration comes into existence. This narration has got nothing to do with the Shia Imamah, my dear. The wording of the narration is completely different from the narration he's quoting from the Shia sources, but he deceives and misleads the public into thinking that no, we are quoting the same narration. It is the exact same narration. Alhamdulillah, it is found in Sunni books and also in Shia books. No, my dear. You can fool the public with this, but you cannot even fool the Sunnis who are well versed in their sources. They will come and they will call you out. They will call this for the fraud that it is. They will say, as the hadith mentions, "Man khala'a yadan min ta'atin laqi Allah yawm al-qiyamati wa la hujjata lahu." Whoever removes his hand from obedience to the authority and the caliph, he will meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment in a state where he will have no hujjah, no proof to support him. وَمَن مَاتَ, now listen to these wordings, وَمَن مَاتَ وَلَيْسَ فِي عُنُقِهِ بَيْعَةٌ مَاتَ مِيتَةَ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ. Anyone who dies in a state whereby his neck does not have the bay'ah, there is no bay'ah on his neck to the ruler of the time, مَاتَ مِيتَةً جَاهِلِيَّةً, he dies a death of ignorance. So the Khulafa of Bani Umayyah, they want to promote this idea that if you die without giving us bay'ah, you will die a death of jahiliyyah. So the same scare tactics, bullying the people, religious blackmail, telling them you have to do bay'ah, otherwise Rasulullah is saying you will die a death of jahiliyyah. So actually, if you study the origin of these narrations, where are they exactly coming from? The first people to invent it were not the Shia. So this is something you will only uncover through deep research, when you really go into the sources and you trace where these narrations are coming from. And even the Shia, where are they getting this from? So this is what you discover. You discover that the first people who invented this hadith of dying a death of ignorance, if you don't recognize the authority of your time, the first people are the Banu Umayyah and their supporters. They invent this hadith to force the people and arm twist the Muslims into giving them bay'ah. Because the Muslims, they believe in Rasulullah, and if Rasulullah says give them bay'ah, then many Muslims will give them bay'ah. Even if they are zalim, they will give them bay'ah if Rasulullah commands it. So they say, okay, Rasulullah has commanded it, and this is the narration, mashallah. This is what Rasulullah said. So the Sunnis invented this, not Sunnis, the Bani Umayyah, the Umayyad agents, they invented this hadith and they circulated it in the mainstream circles from where it reached the Sunni hadith compilations. Where did the Shia get this from? The Shia, what they did was they actually took this particular narration, and the Ghulat were known for this. So you will not understand, you will think this is a weird claim, but actually once you study Al-Rijal deeply, you study especially the movement of Ghulu, you will realize what the Ghulat were specialists in. The Ghulat, what they used to do is that they used to look at narrations that are in wide circulation among the Muslims. They used to take those narrations and they used to add and interpolate their wordings into it. And then after completing the interpolation, they would then circulate it among the Shia. So they would bank on the fact that the narration or certain words of the narration are famous and well known. So if we add or change a few things, and especially if it's pretty neck and close, people will not detect it. Especially in the Shia, how will they detect it? And we are attributing it to the Imams. So what they did was they took this narration about giving bay'ah to the caliph, the political leader of the time. They removed the mention of the caliph and the bay'ah and all of that, and they replaced it with Imam. And this is what they did with everything. Even in Qur'an, everywhere Allah mentions himself or he mentions one of his signs, the sun, moon, everywhere they insert Ali and the Imams. Ali, even shirk, when they define, they say shirk is to not Allah in the Quran says, وَمَن يُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ, whoever associates with Allah. But if you look at the narrations of the Ghulat, which have survived in our books, they define shirk and they attribute to the Imams. The Imam said shirk is not shirk with Allah, idol worship or believing in other gods. No. Shirk is to associate with Ali, to consider someone worthy of Khilafah together with Ali. That is the real shirk. This is a completely fabricated, nonsensical claim, but they attributed the Imams of Ahlul Bayt and they confused and deceived many Shia. And this is what they specialized in doing. Everything, even if you look at the tafsir of Ali bin Ibrahim al-Qummi, in the tafsir of the verse, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَسْتَحِي أَن يَضْرِبَ مَثَلًا مَا بَعُوضَةً فَمَا فَوْقَهَا. Allah is not ashamed to give the example and the parable even of a mosquito, a gnat. They say al-ba'udah to Ali ibn Abi Talib, and they attribute it to the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. They said the ba'udah here, mosquito, refers to Ali ibn Abi Talib. Yeah, what does mosquito have to do with Ali ibn Abi Talib? No, but the Ghulat, this was their trend, this was their style. They take anywhere, anything, any narration of Rasulullah, any ayah of Qur'an, anything, they just insert their imamology into it. So this is what happened, is they took this, they saw this narration is popular because the Banu Umayyah, and then after them the Banu Abbas also, it served them, this narration, even though probably the Banu Abbas may have known that it's a fabrication, but they were like, this is serving us, because now we are the caliphs, and we would definitely like every Muslim to give us bay'ah. So they did nothing to kill this narration. In fact, in their time, it is promoted even more. And so it becomes very famous. The Ghulat take this narration. It's famous among the mainstream circles. The Shia, they cannot even trust whether what's in the mainstream circles is believable or not. So the Ghulat take that part, they remove the caliph, and they insert the Imam and say, "Man mata lam ya'rif imama zamani mata mitatan jahiliya." So they performed a transplant operation. They removed the first part and they added the second part. So this idea that this narration is accepted by the Sunnis, my friend, you are comparing oranges with apple. You have an apple in the Shia sources, which is talking about the Imam of the time, and you have an orange, a completely different narration in the Sunni sources, which is talking about the, and it's not that the Sunnis are misinterpreting it. No, the narration has appeared in this form. They don't even need to misinterpret it or misrepresent it or play any games. The one who invented it to suit their purpose, which is, their purpose was what? To give validity and legitimacy to the caliph of the time. And so the narration, the way it is designed, it is giving legitimacy not to the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, but rather to the Khulafa of the Banu Umayyah and Banu Abbas. And this speaker, he's taking a narration which is giving legitimacy to the Banu Umayyah and Banu Abbas, and he's trying to fool and deceive the public into thinking that that narration is actually confirming the Shia version, whereas the reality is the Shia version is completely different, the Sunni version is completely different. You're comparing apples and oranges. This is the duplicity and deception that is undertaken in that video, and it is shocking, but it is unfortunately a trend, and that's why, unfortunately, I would never advise such speakers to be, showcased and to be put forward whenever you want to send representatives to dialogue with people of other sects. These speakers have brought a great deal of embarrassment by lying and misrepresenting. You cannot lie your way through, debates. And the Sunnis, their scholars are obviously, they're not fools and ignoramuses that you can fool with this. You can fool your own public who is already biased towards you. You can deceive them very easily with these kinds of stunts and gimmicks and tricks. But the scholars on the other side who are watching this, because these videos are now on YouTube, so everyone can watch them, they will, I shudder to think the kind of impression that they will develop of the speakers. The kind of humiliation that you're bringing the school of Ahlul Bayt is colossal. Because anyone who's well versed in the sources, when he sees you lying through your teeth about such basic matters, it gives a very bad impression, unfortunately, of the school of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salatu wasalam. So that part really saddens us. And as far as his claim is concerned about the fact that if you don't accept Imamah as part, or you don't accept their divine appointment or things like that, then you cannot call yourself a Shia, then obviously this is not supported by the sources. The definition of Shia in the classical sources that was given by, for example, An-Najashi, which he attributes to Aban ibn Taghlib, the companion of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, one of the earliest Shias, if you like. So he defines a Shia as someone who, after Rasulullah, if there is a difference of opinion, he takes the statement of Imam Ali alayhi salam. In Sunnah, in matters of fiqh and Sunnah, there are differences. Companions differed among themselves. So he says a Shia is someone who simply, after Rasulullah, if there is ikhtilaf, he goes with the qawl of Ali alayhi salam. And if after Imam Ali there is ikhtilaf on what the opinion of Imam Ali alayhi salam was, he takes the opinion of Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salam. That's a Shia in the classical period. Obviously, later on, under the influence of the Ghulat and their fabrications, people started adding until a really bloated sect came into existence. And the Shiaism that you have today is a direct result of all that material, and that is why you find Ayatollah Sheikh Abdullah al-Mamqani. So this is not someone who has just plastered a doctor in front of his name. This is Ayatollah Sheikh Abdullah al-Mamqani, the author of a 39-volume encyclopedia on Ilm al-Rijal entitled Tanqih al-Maqal fi Ilm al-Rijal. He's the teacher of Ayatollah Sayyid Shihabuddin al-Mar'ashi al-Najafi. He's a traditional scholar. He says that the result is that Shiaism today has come such a long way that أن أكثر ما نعتقده اليوم من ضروريات المذهب كان القول به معدودا في الغلو والارتفاع في العهد السابق. He says majority of what we believe to be the core, essential, non-negotiable beliefs of the madhab. Notice he doesn't say min daruriyat ad-din, because even he's not prepared to accept. And these great maraji and mujtahideen, they are not arguing about deen here. He is talking about the madhab. So even the Shia madhab, even usulul madhab, is Imamah part of usulul madhab or not? Even Ayatollah al-Mamqani is even raising implicitly doubts about this, that even if you want to include this in the usul of madhab, the Imamah theory that you have today, the full divine appointment thing and all of that, he says majority of what the Shias today believe to be the daruriyat, the absolutely core, non-negotiable beliefs, not of the deen. For deen you only have, as we mentioned, Tawheed, Ma'ad and Risala. But for madhab, as I told you, in usul al-madhab, Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Sa'id al-Tabatabai, al-Hakim, and these other maraja, they're putting Imamah there, they're putting Adl there. But Ayatollah al-Mamqani is saying that even putting it there, today you can put it and get away with it, that there are usul al-madhab. In the past, if you go back far, you travel back in time, and you go to the classical period of Shiaism, there are so many things that are today considered to be core, non-negotiable parts of the Shia madhab, but in the past, they were viewed as ghulu, they were viewed as shirk, as kufr, as deviation, as heresy. And yes, there is indication, there is evidence in the sources that indicates that this whole theory of divine appointment and this idea that they are divinely appointed and you have to absolutely believe in each and every single imam, this is not there. You cannot trace it back absolutely clearly to the times of the imams, for example. So obviously you can bring fabricated narrations to indicate this, but if you go by the sahih narrations, so for example, the narrations with the scholars of Rijal authenticate is, we have here a narration, for example, by Al-Kashi in his book in Rijal al-Kashi, which is one of the oldest and most authoritative textbooks of Ilm al-Rijal. You have this narration. So this narration, he narrates from Muhammad ibn al-Hasan and Uthman both. Okay. So as far as the sanad is concerned, Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Barathi is majhul. But as far as Ibn Hamid al-Wahshi is concerned, from Kash, he has been authenticated by Shaykh al-Tusi. So he's narrating from two people, both of whom are narrating from the same narrator. So in that sense, one narrator, even if he's majhul, the other narrator, you have an independent tariq through him. So that's why the scholars of Rijal, they authenticate it. Ultimately, we don't need this narration to prove any point of our own, but I'm just showing you that if you go in the sources, there is evidence. We will prove our point and our case from the Qur'an in a few moments. But let me show you that even reformist scholars, they have used this narration to argue that even from a narration point of view, the idea that Imamah and the current day conception of Imamah is not something that you can trace back to the early period. So in this narration, you are told تذاكر ابن أبي يعفور ومعلى بن خنيس فقال ابن أبي يعفور الأوصياء علماء أبرار أتقياء. This narration references the famous debate that took place between two contemporaries of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, two companions. One of them is Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur. Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur, if you look at the books of Rijal, they heap and lavish the highest praises on him. And the reason why they do so is because Imam Sadiq alayhi salam himself is reported to have lavished great praises on Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur. In some narrations, he says he's one of the only or among the very few companions who absolutely obey me in everything and who listen to me and with whom I'm absolutely pleased. The rest of the companions, he, in a way, is not pleased with. And Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur dies in the lifetime of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. So you cannot argue for him, because the narration we're going to present, you cannot apply the mitat al-jahiliyyah on him. Because Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he actually did tarahum on him, and he expressed his satisfaction and appreciation for Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur even after he died. So Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur, this great, and he was among the most learned companions of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. And he is, Najashi, when he talks about him, he says, thiqatun thiqa. He is double thiqa. And he's very trustworthy and very reliable. So he has a debate with Mu'alla bin Khunais. Mu'alla bin Khunais, if you go into classical books of Ilm al-Rijal, they dismiss him as one of the ghulat. Even though today some traditional scholars, they try to rescue him, but he is, you can actually prove that he's of the ghulat just by analyzing his narrations. The kind of absolutely fabricated narrations he transmits and the khurafat that he transmits are sufficient to prove that he was among the ghulat. So in any case, Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur, this genuine companion of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, has a debate with Mu'alla bin Khunais, who is a ghali embedded among the companions of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. What is the topic of the debate? So Ibn Abi Ya'fur, at first, he presents his motion. His motion is al-awsiya'u ulama'u abrar atqiya. So you have heard of the ulama abrar theory, yeah? This is where they get it from. So don't say that this is anyone who puts this forward. You cannot say he's not Shia, because if you're saying he's not Shia, then that means Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur is not a follower of Ahlul Bayt. He's not Shia. No problem. If you can prove that Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur was not a follower of Imam al-Sadiq, despite the fact that Imam al-Sadiq has said that he obeys me in everything, I'm pleased with him, and all the classical Shia scholars of Ilm al-Rijal have lavished praises on him, saying that he is one of the greatest companions of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. But look at his view. Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur, he says, al-awsiya'u ulama'u abrar atqiya. These awsiya, these people who are the inheritors of the legacy of the Prophet, these Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhimu salatu wassalam, they are ulama, they are scholars, atqiya, not normal scholars, they're scholars of taqwa. They have a lot of taqwa, and they are abrar, they are righteous, pious people. So the belief, the aqidah of Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur with regard to the Imams of Ahlul Bayt is that they are pious, God-fearing scholars. Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur. Mu'alla bin Khunais, the ringleader of the Ghulat, what does he say? He disagrees. He cannot accept. Just like the speaker said, oh, how can we? They're just pious scholars, like other pious scholars in the Ummah. How can we accept that? So he has to bring something to, but obviously he cannot deny that there are also ulama, abrar, atqiya. He cannot deny that. So what does Mu'alla bin Khunais do? He advances a rival claim. He says, no, al-awsiya'u anbiya. So this is ultimately, from this you get the mindset of the Ghulat. This is what the Ghulat wanted to do. They wanted to give Imams the position of Anbiya. Because Anbiya are sent by God, they're chosen specifically, directly by God, they are divinely appointed, and then basically they have that status. The Ghulat, from this narration you can discover an indication and an evidence that what are the Ghulat after? They want to make Imams Anbiya. Why do they want to make Imams Anbiya? Did the Imams ever claim that we are Anbiya? Absolutely not. In this narration, you will get the result. If you're in doubts, whether the Imams had any doubts about Nubuwah, the narration will clear it for you. So the question is, Mu'alla bin Khunais, what possessed him to claim that Imam al-Sadiq is and the rest of the Imams are Anbiya? See, here's where you have to understand. These ghulat, they were desperate to thrust the idea of Imamah on the throats of the Muslims. So they felt that if you preach the truth about the Imams, which is that they are the most learned scholars, they are God-fearing, God-conscious. They said if we present the Imams, if we advertise and market imamology of this kind to the public, then it's not binding on them. You see, even if they are most learned, muttaqeen, people can still choose to follow other people. And the Ghulat were too desperate to get the people to submit to the Imam. It's not that the other companions were not also interested in that. No, Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur also. But the difference between Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur and Mu'alla bin Khunais is that Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur is saying that I can prove that Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam is the best and most worthy of being followed by pointing to his knowledge, to his taqwa, to his righteousness. You cannot show me any among his contemporaries who can match him in knowledge, in taqwa, and in piety. So I also believe in the Imaamah of Sadiq alayhi salam. I also believe he's a pious role model and he's the best guide after Rasulullah in our time. But I'm not going to lie against Allah. I'm not going to do iftira. I'm not going to invent a hadith and attribute it to him falsely just to thrust this idea and force the people, thrust the idea down their throats that no, you have to absolutely accept them whether you like or you don't, otherwise you go to hell. So this is the difference. The Imams of Ahlul Bayt, they did not want to promote themselves and thrust themselves down the throats of people. they wanted to be accepted and acknowledged for their merits. If you have eyes enough to see that we are the most learned, we have the greatest level of insight into the Qur'an and Sunnah, we know the religion of Islam inside out, and that is why you should turn to us whenever you are confused, whenever you need guidance, whenever you want more ma'rifah of Allah, come to us, we will teach you. We have knowledge, and every knowledge that we have, it is wiratha an Rasulillah. It is inheritance that we have received from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam through our pious forefathers. So in any case, let us finish the narration. Mu'alla ibn Khunais says, Al-Awsiya Anbiya. The Imams, these Awsiya, they are Anbiya. Why is he saying Anbiya? He wants to connect them to the issue of divine appointment, because Anbiya are divinely appointed. And Anbiya, you have to believe in all of them, because the Qur'an says, La nufarriqu bayna ahadin min rusuli. You absolutely have to believe. You cannot reject any of the Anbiya. Musa, Isa, Dawood, Sulaiman. You are not allowed. If you are Muslim, you have to accept all of them. And by force, Allah insists. By force, actually, you don't have an option. If you want salvation, you have to accept them. Otherwise, Allah is not going to force you in the sense of take away your free will and then force you. No. Meaning it is mandatory. The Ghulat are not happy with this idea. They're like, if they are just ulama, then the ummah is not going to accept them. We have to find, just like the Banu Umayyah, they said that the ummah doesn't want to give us bay'ah. So let us use scare tactics to thrust down this idea onto their throats that they have to accept us as the khulafa and as the leaders. They have to have our bay'ah in their neck, otherwise they go to hell and they die mushrik. So the Ghulat, they said, okay, this idea that the Banu Umayyah have used for the khulafa, this idea actually should be used for the Imams. The only problem is the Imams did not authorize this. They did not want to thrust themselves on the ummah. They expected the ummah to be mature enough to look at their ilm, their fadl, their taqwa, their piety, and then, voluntarily submit to them. And submit to them not as in become their slaves or worship them. No. Submit to them in the sense of accept that they are the most knowledgeable and take knowledge from them. That's it. They had knowledge, they wanted to give it to people. So in any case, these two companions or contemporaries, they have a dispute. Mu'alla bin Khunais wants to argue that Imams are Anbiya. They are just like Anbiya. They are appointed by God. They have all these qualities. Abdullah bin Abi Afur, this distinguished companion of Imam al-Sadiq, he says no, they are just ulama, abrar, atqiya. They are pious, righteous scholars. I would like to see what the speaker says about Abdullah bin Abi Afur. Does he have the audacity and temerity to remove him from the fold of Shiaism and say that, he's just arguing? Can you call Abdullah? Me you can call, okay, no problem. Say, I'm just a kid, okay. But Abdullah bin Abi Afur, can you call him a pseudo or neo-Salafi? There was no Wahhabism at that time. There was no Salafism, was not even born. He is actually himself among the Salaf, the earliest generations. So what do you say about him? He is saying no, they are ulama, abrar, atqiya. This is there, and this is not a Sunni or Wahhabi source we are quoting. This is Rijal al-Kashi, Ikhtiyar Ma'rifat al-Rijal, bridged by Shaykh al-Tusi, and considered to be, so the author is al-Kashi, but the Ikhtiyar is of Shaykh al-Tusi, and it is considered to be one of the earliest and oldest and most authoritative books of Ilm al-Rijal in Shia Ilm al-Rijal. And the narration has been authenticated by the scholars of Rijal. So Mu'alla bin Khunais wants to put the Imams at the position of Anbiya, meaning you absolutely have to believe in them, you have to believe they have been chosen by God, all of that. Abdullah bin Abi Afur is saying no, they're just pious, righteous scholars, that's it. Now the judgment. فَدَخَلَ عَلَى أَبِي عَبْدِ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ السَّلَامِ. Luckily, today you can have a debate ad nauseum, ad infinitum, you'll never come to a conclusion. But at that time, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam was alive. So they go and enter into the presence of Abi Abdullah al-Sadiq alayhi salam. فلما استقر مجلسهما قال فبدأهما أبو عبد الله عليه السلام فقال يا عبد الله أبرأ ممن قال أنا أو أنا أنبياء. They say when the time for judgment came, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam said to Abdullah bin Abi Afur and Mu'alla ibn Khunais in the presence of both. This is the verdict of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. He says, أَبْرَأُ مِمَّنْ قَالَ أَنَّا أَنْبِيَا. I disassociate myself in the presence of Allah and with Allah from the person who claims we are Anbiya. So who has he supported? Who has he? Mu'alla bin Khunais is the one who was saying that these are Anbiya. They have a station like the Anbiya. And indeed today there are many ghulat who will come and tell you that the Imams of Ahlul Bayt or Imam Ali al-Islam, they try to elevate them above the station of the Anbiya. They say except for Rasulullah, the Imams of Ahlul Bayt are superior to all the previous Anbiya. Imam al-Sadiq's verdict is, forget about superior. Even if you bring us to the same level of the Anbiya, what do we do? Abra'u mimman qal anna Anbiya. We disassociate ourselves and we reject and repudiate those who claim that we are Anbiya. So this is the narration. Now I'm wondering what title or what tag is he going to use against Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur? Is he going to say he's a neo-Salafi? Is he a Wahhabi? Is he what? He's actually, if you go by the classical books of Ilm al-Rijal and even the contemporary, no contemporary Shia scholar has been able to challenge Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur and expel him from the school of Ahlul Bayt. So if you cannot expel Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur, then how can you expel those who believe in the same thing as Abdullah bin Abi Ya'fur? You cannot expel them from the school of Ahlul Bayt.